Okay, thanks, Sean. Okay, hi everyone. Nice to be here. So, the title of my talk is Core Blimey, Putting the Lingua Franca Core to Use. How do I change my slides? There we go. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to start us off with a little bit of food for thought. There's a lot of questions here and a lot to think about, so I don't necessarily want you to put anything in the chat box. I'd just like you to read the questions and just give them a little bit of thought. I'll give you a moment for this. Well, I just noticed the typo. Oops. Okay, I hope everyone's had time to read those questions. Moving on, the aim of my session is to introduce the Lingua Franca Core and to think about what the implications are for the teaching of pronunciation and how we can use it to prioritise and inform what pronunciation we do in the classroom and classroom activities. So first of all, can I get a little show of hands? Anyone can click the little hand button at the top of your screen. Who has heard of the Lingua Franca Core? Okay, a couple of people. I hadn't heard of it until recently, so, don't feel bad and if you haven't. Quite a lot. 4 people so far. Okay, just 4 people. All right, lovely. Okay, so we'll start off with a definition of the Lingua Franca Core. And I've also added ELF, so English as a Lingua Franca, and EIL, which is English as an international language. Here's a definition for you. So the Lingua Franca Core is a list of pronunciation features which appear to be crucial to produce accurately in order for English as a Lingua Franca or international language communication to be intelligible. The list was published by Jennifer Jenkins in 2000 as a result of extensive research which focused on genuine interactional speech data. And she found out from this what key aspects of pronunciation were responsible for communication breakdown. And she made a list of these features. And she also made a list of features that fall outside of the core that are probably not necessary for learners to be able to produce, especially if their goal is not to communicate or sound like a native speaker, so using English as a lingua franca. Jenkins asserts that by teaching features outside of the core receptively rather than productively, learners can still understand other accents of English and maintain something of their L1 accent, which many learners may wish to do, given that their accent is an important part of their personal identity. I was telling people in the staff room recently, I had a language exchange. I speak Spanish fairly fluently, but I had a language exchange and I was chatting to this girl. She wasn't a language teacher, and she tore my accent apart. I take a lot of pride in my Spanish accent, but she tore it apart and she told me that I didn't sound native at all. I sounded like a gringa. And I got very defensive and I was like, well, of course I sound like a gringa. I am a gringa. My accent is going to be a British accent no matter how hard I try. So some people do wish to retain their native accent. I think it's unrealistic to expect learners to have a perfect accent. So moving on, there's some wider implications for the Lingua Franca Core. Before we go on to say exactly what the features of the Lingua Franca Core are, wider implications being, first of all, it allows teachers to make informed decisions in their selection of pronunciation models based on actual research, empirical research, rather than on intuition or on regional native or non-native speaker bias. It embraces the sociolinguistic facts of regional variation and recognises the rights of non-native speakers to their own legitimate regional accents rather than regarding deviation from native speaker pronunciation norms as error. It subverts the widespread assumption that the most appropriate model for pronunciation comes from its native speakers and that a standard native speaker English accent, British or American as many people think, is the most desirable. It subverts this. It's not. And it radically improves the status of non-native speakers, or as perhaps better referred to as bilingual English speakers, but we won't start on the topic of terminology at this point. It improves the status of non-native speakers given their membership of the English as an international language community and their experience of learning the language, as well as being, as Jenkins says, better placed to identify which core features are already present in their learners' L1 repertoires and which will need to be added. Okay, so the LSC in short, these are the main features. First of all, vowel length distinctions. So the length of diphthongs must be preserved in order to be intelligible. For example, beans, not bins. Consonant sounds are very important. All are necessary except possibly and for which most substitutions are possible, such as F and V. Also, T needs to be carefully pronounced between vowels, Italy, and in clusters in the middle of words. So winter should not be flat, as in general American pronunciation. Otherwise, Italy might sound like Illy, or ladder might sound like ladder. Also, the consonants P, T, and K must be aspirated when occurring in initial position in a stressed syllable, i.e. the first P in paper. I'm going through these very quickly, but again, the next ones here are preservation of consonant clusters, also very important. At the beginning of words, they can't be simplified. Consonant clusters in the middle and the end of words are a bit more complicated. They can be simplified if it makes articulation easier, but only according to rules of elision, dropping sounds. That also apply to native English varieties. Word grouping and placement of nuclear or tonic stress is also very, very important. So the stream of speech should be divided into meaningful tone units. We're going to see some examples of this in a little while. But here it says, let's meet next Saturday, or let's meet next Saturday. Obviously, that changes the meaning of the sentence quite drastically. Okay, so moving on. Just very quickly, are there any features that you're surprised not to be in the core? There was 4. So vowel, just to remind you, vowel sounds, consonants, and word group, preservation of consonant clusters, and word grouping and placement of tonic stress. Are there any features you're surprised not in the core? Quickly in the chat box. Personal pronouns. Okay. Strong weak forms. Okay. More about stress. Yeah. Syllable stress. Okay. All right. These are all things that I think we put a lot of importance on when we're teaching pronunciation. But these come into non-core features. They're not the top priority in terms of pronunciation, in terms of production and intelligibility. However, they're very important features when it comes especially to receptive pronunciation. So the non-core features are the substitutions of these, the first sound and the sound. Sorry, no more coming up. Weak forms, as someone said there, I think it was Hannah, yeah. Weak forms are there in the non-core features. Vowel quality, cake, pronounced cake, or cake, whatever. Word stress, as Danny said, or syllable stress. Perfectionist, pronounced perfectionist. And some features of connected speech, such as elision and assimilation. These are definitely worth teaching, but perhaps they're not necessarily to be prioritized in terms of production if your learners are mainly going to be speaking English as a lingua franca. So, moving on, I'm going to give you some activities to work on these 4 core features. I've got these from, I think Lottie and I mentioned before, Pronunciation Practice Activities by Martin Hewins. We mentioned it in the chat box when Oana was giving her presentation. So, the first activity is minimal pair bingo, and Oana also had a similar activity. So, for example, we've got some minimal pairs here that are really useful for working on consonants and vowel sounds. So, first of all, you could choose an area. I don't know if you can see these minimal pairs very well. But choose an area that the students have particular problems with in your context. So, for example, in Argentina, people have a lot of problems with the difference between loose and lose. So these kind of the length of the vowel sounds. So you could give them a list of minimal pairs that focus on a specific area of vowels or consonants. I would work on them first with them, maybe giving them the phonemes, working on them productively, getting them to recognize the difference. And then you could play a game of bingo. So give them a list of words. Well, ask each student to write down 10 of the words at random. And then you say the words at random and students cross them off their list as they hear them. Obviously, you need to keep a note of which ones you've said. And then the first to cross out all their words is the winner and shouts bingo. And then, obviously, you need to get that student who gets bingo to say all their words out loud so you can check the pronunciation. And then they could go ahead and be the bingo caller from that point onwards, and it could go around the class and you could repeat over and over. Okay, so that's minimal pairs bingo. That's one activity. Moving on to the next one. Lip reading. This also goes really nicely with Oana's activity that she showed us earlier on, the basic sound insight. That would be a nice precursor to this exercise, in fact. So you've got a list of words here. So for example, if I get you all to focus on the first set of words, sat and fat, I don't know how well you can all see my lips here, but if I say one of these words, can you tell me in the chat box which word I say? I'll do that again quickly. Okay, yep, fat, exactly. So this is really nice for getting students to focus on the place of articulation in the mouth, so where you're making the sound. And then once you've modelled this as a teacher, you can get students to work in pairs and do this together. Sorry for those of you who can't see my face very well, but hopefully you get the idea of the exercise. The next activity I have is consonant cluster towers. So first of all, to demonstrate the activity, say a vowel sound aloud a few times. So for example, a. And then ask the students to add a single consonant sound, but not necessarily a single letter, sound, to the beginning or the end of the word, the vowel sounds, make another word. So a becomes am. Write this above, excuse me, getting over a cold. Write this above the a to create am, and ask them if they can add another consonant sound to create another word. And then you start building the tower, and I'll show you the tower here. So a becomes am, becomes ram, becomes tram, tramp, trample, tramples. So this continues until no new words can be made, and it's nice to be able to practice consonant clusters and getting them to say them out loud and thinking about the sounds. Also, it could also be a competitive activity in teams. Give them a vowel sound and see who creates the tallest tower, or see how fast they can get 5 words out of it, whatever. Okay, so moving on to the last one. This is probably much harder to see, and I apologise for this. But this one's about hearing and saying prominent words. So I would start with, we've got some sentences here. So the first line, for example, they're on the table, they're on the table, they're on the table. A listening activity to recognise the stress in the different sentences. So they're on the table, they're on the table, or they're on the table. And then you've got some questions in the second box. And you ask the question, so for example, where are my books? They're on the table. And they have to choose the sentence with the correct stress. Or the most appropriate response. And then you can check the answers by asking to read them out loud with the correct stress, and then they can repeat the exercise various times, possibly taking away the boxes altogether or folding it over so you can't see the responses, and they have to practice the responses from memory. Okay, so that's 4 activities for 4 core pronunciation lingua franca core points. So before we finish, I'm going to give you some reflection questions, some questions that refer back to the questions from the beginning of my section. And I'd just like you to think about these questions, and if you've got time, write in the chat box what you think about the lingua franca core. Do you think you could use it to prioritise what you focus on in the classroom. If you didn't know about it before, do you feel like you have a stronger sense of what it is and what pronunciation features to focus on with your students? Will it change or amend how you teach pronunciation? Do you share it with your students? And do you think this could change their perspective on pronunciation or their accent bias if they have one? In Argentina, there is a little bit of an accent bias towards wanting to speak British English. I'm not quite sure why, but I think that's something that needs to be done away with. Really, it's not necessary for that to be their goal. So yeah, that's the end of my talk, really. I'll just give you some time to post some comments in the chat box.
Great, lovely. Thank you very much, Emma. Wonderful, very interesting stuff there.
Okay, thank you. And sorry for my voice is going towards the end there. I'm struggling with a cough.